quartz, crystal quartz reading, skull, crystal quartz. I'm not finishing my sentences, which is already not a good start, but be patient with me, we'll get to it. Anyway, let me see where we're at. Let me see if I can share this live with other people. And, okay, fuck that. Copy. All right, so let me start. So the first thing I think I'm going to do before, I just want to see how many people get on, and we'll see. I'm going to read from, trying to turn this around in such a way that, from the message of the crystal skull from Atlantis to the New Age, and here we are. Okay. And I'm going to read randomly, because you know that's how I do it. All right, listen to this. Ancient crystal carving techniques. The early cutting of crystal was accomplished mainly by chipping the crystal into the desired shape. The chips would then be pulverized and used for further grinding and polishing. Crystal, because its structure is similar to flint, can be shaped by using a small hammer to chip it. Very intricate designs can be formed in crystal with proper skills, although no one can say with absolute certainty how the skull was made. We're talking about the Mitchell-Hedges skull. Was formed and carved by rotary grinding, chipping, and hand rubbing. The entire face area was roughed out by chipping. The rough shaping of the eyes sockets was by use of rotary grinding device. The chipping of a piece of crystal placed stress on the crystal itself. Immersed in a special refracting oil and viewed by polarized light, these stresses marks show up as wavy lines. It is possible to detect rotary tool marks under a binocular microscope. For modern machine tools leave marks that are repeated identically. The ancient hand rotary devices like the patina on silver leave scratches that go in every conceivable directions. In early Greek and Roman times and in India, crystal was only shaped to remove the oftentimes ugly matrix. Very little shaping or smoothing was done in order to save as much of the crystal as possible. In the Middle Ages, crystal balls were made in Japan and China by first being hand chipped into a rough ball, then by grinding and hand polishing. Unfortunately, 50 to 90% of the crystal would be lost in this manner. Absolute control was required. Only one delicate chip at a time was made, for an error would mean hours of work to rectify a mistake. This is interesting because here's the deal. The Mitchell-Hedges skull, okay, from what I've heard, doesn't have... There's some idea that there's tool marks, but you have to understand it was found in the 1920s. So, and there's different crystal skulls out there that are power skulls. So this one, from Atlantis to the New Age, as you know, crystals were a huge part of Atlantis. And let me look in the beginning. So, origins and premises. What exactly is the crystal skull? It has been called, here, let me give you a picture of this right here. It has been called the world's most mysterious artifacts, a priceless life-size quartz crystal human skull carved into a perfect likeness of a human head. Coming to us from uncharted ancient times, it cannot be duplicated even by today's advanced technology. That's a big deal. Who made this amazing skull and for what reason was it made? It is reputed to have unusual powers, and all who see or touch this skull report unusual changes within themselves. Does the skull have the power to heal or transform? The crystal skull described in this book is commonly known as the Mitchell-Hedges skull because it was found by F.A. Mitchell-Hedges' adopted daughter Anna while on an archaeological dig in British Honduras in the 1920s. Mystery and intrigue even surrounded the event of its discovery. Not only is this crystal skull anatomically accurate, coming from an ancient time when such technical knowledge was supposedly unknown, but it would have been impossible to fashion it with the primitive tools early people had at their disposal. That's the point. It wasn't fashioned by primitive tools. There are two other authenticated ancient human-like crystal skulls in the museum. One, which is life-size, is in the British Museum of Man, and the other smaller skull is in the Museum de l'Homme in Paris. these two skulls will be compared to the more finely crafted Mitchell Hedges skull. Because quartz crystal cannot be carbon dated, there's no way of knowing how ancient this crystal skull might be. It is thought to be at least 12,000 years, and some theories place its age in millions of years. The only sure way to determine its age would be to smash the crystal skull apart, destroying an exquisite artifact in order to ascertain the age of the water inclusions trapped within it. That's the stupidest shit I've ever heard. This, however, would only tell trapped if inside. This, however, would only tell us the age of the crystal skull, which it was formed, not when the skull itself was fashioned. Oh, that's ridiculous. Okay. This amazing, did you get that? In other words, it would tell you them how old the crystal itself was, not the actual formed crystal skull. Hey, this amazing crystal skull is reputed to have miraculous healing properties and telepathic information concerning the origins of mankind. Many theorists feel it was either made or used in ancient Atlantis. Well, like I said before in one of my lives, I talked about the fact that the crystal, the Mitchell Hedges skull, was made by a dead Atlantean priestess who was captured by the warring faction, the crazy fucks who were doing all kinds of genetic manipulation and all kinds of DNA manipulation, all kinds of crap, that eventually was a frequency mismatch to Atlantis, which created the great deluge, the great tsunamis that took down the island. That was number one. And so anyway, so she was captured. This is the story, okay? And this is the story that came from psychics who worked with the skull. Wait, was the priestess? No, just listen to the story. But thank you for the question. So when she was captured, okay, she was beheaded. And this is very common from today's warring issues that we have in our planet right now to the ancient way. The brutality hasn't really changed. So anyway, so she was beheaded and her skull was sent back, her head, which is classic way of telling people back the fuck off or game over. They sent the head back to the factions that were going against them, and they took the skull upon receipt. They cleaned it and they encircled it and they infused the skull, right? Now remember, there's no flesh on it anymore. And they infused it and turned it into a crystalline matter. Now, why is this possible? Well, because we are not in 5D, my friends, and they were, and they could actually put intention and change bone and teeth into something else. And the reason why I'm talking about it is because there are people who have actually psychics who worked with the skull individually, wrote their reports of what they saw in the holographic images bouncing out of the skull during their meditation, during their connection with it, and they all came back with a similar story. You can't make that shit up if you tried. Does that answer your question, Monkey? So that's what happened. And when I first heard that, I wrote about it in my book Recall, this book, wrote about it in this book, and talked about it. I knew this whole thing. I don't understand what you mean when you say 5D. You need to do a lot of studying on 5D dimensional consciousness. In 5D dimensional consciousness or 6D dimensional consciousness, oh, this one here, the Recall, here, right here. You see? So in this book about twin flames, I wrote this book, and in it, one of the protagonists, you'll see it show up again and again in the book. I wrote about the Mitchell Hedges skull, though it's not called that because it's being used for sacrifice and rituals in the ancient world 3,500 years ago. So these skulls have been traveling through the ancient world. And this skull, I know for a fact, traveled through multiple realities, multiple timelines on planet Earth, okay? But thank you for asking. So let me see. Hang on. Let me read some more of this, okay? Hang on. Okay. So what's weird is they're saying, why was a skull carved out of a rock crystal anyway? Quartz crystal is an extremely hard substance, 7 on the Mohs scale, only slightly softer than diamond. It is a very difficult medium to use in carving. One theory is that the skull was fashioned only after 300 years of patient craftsmanship. This book is not talking about, they're actually talking about like it was carved, and it wasn't. So I buy different books on this particular subject, but one of the books that I really love, which I'll bring up in a minute if you want me to, actually talks about how psychics worked on it. Hang on for a quick second, okay? Hang on. What happened with the crystal skull is that it was found in British Honduras, and Anna Mitchell Hedges found, I think she was like a teenage girl, and she found, I think, the top of the head. And they kept excavating the site, and they found the lower jawbone, the lower mandible, which detaches fully. It's in perfect condition. And they were able to find that, I think it was like 6 months or 9 months later, something like that. And then it came out, and then they started, this is what makes me laugh, because they did the same thing with the Shroud of Turin. Remember the Shroud of Turin? The shroud that Jesus, Yeshua, was wrapped in after he was cut down from the cross. Okay, they tried to say that it was a fake. And finally it's come out again that it is real. And why is it real? Well, for one thing, some of the pollen, the petals, and the leaves on the shroud are only found is in Jerusalem. You can't find it anywhere else in the world, number one. But for a while, they were trying to say that it was fake. Were holy relics made? Yes, there were lots of holy relics were created to control the masses. We know this. And there was a Shroud of Turin made at around the 15th century, I believe, if I'm correct, or 16th century in France as a holy relic to display. And it was fake, okay? But we're not talking about the copy. We're talking about the real one. And so it's interesting. So let me read chapter 7, okay? Atlantis. When F.A. Mitchell Hedges and his adopted daughter of Anna found the crystal skull in Lupton, he was actually on a search for remnants of the lost legendary civilization of Atlantis. In 1935, the New York American printed a headline saying, "Atlantis was no myth, but the cradle of civilization," declares Hedges. Mitchell Hedges said Atlantis existed. Its engulfment caused the flood, a cataclysm that wiped out millions. Included was this advanced cultural race. Hereupon Atlantis was the cradle of civilization, which we follow to this day, land of origin of the races of America. Even as a young boy, the excitement of adventure and the lure of finding lost civilization was almost an obsession to F.A. Mitchell Hedges. He grew into a tall, spare man who invariably was seen with a pipe clenched between his thin, tight lips. He was a firm believer in independence at any cost and was always restless, wanting to be in the thick of adventure. Until the day he died, he believed he had found Atlantis and had pieced together mankind's early past. Hang on for a quick second, because this is interesting. The destruction of Atlantis. Otto Heinrich Muck was born in Vienna and served in World War I. Engineer, inventor, author, he published articles on biological, geological, and cancer problems. He patented 2,000 inventions that were used by leading industrialists. In World War II, he was the inventor of the U-boat snorkel and a member of the Peenemünde rocket research team. After the war, he was credited with many inventions in the nutritional field. He died in 1956. His book, The Secret of Atlantis, was published in Germany in 1976 and consequently was translated and published in 1978 by Times Books. In this deeply researched scholarly book, Muck builds facts upon facts in logical scientific manner, which shows how Atlantis once existed geologically, how it was destroyed, and when and how the terrible aftermath had worldwide effects. In conclusion, he draws on historical myths to verify his deduction regarding the catastrophe. To be honest with you, I'm sure he studied a lot from Ignatius Donnelly. Ignatius Donnelly is actually the guy who wrote, I think it was damn near 1,000 pages. It's called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World by Ignatius Donnelly, written in the 1870s or thereabouts. And he actually proved that Atlantis could actually submerge in a matter of hours. He proved that islands could actually appear out of nowhere within hours. And he, when I was about 17, I read that book like 3 or 4 times because, again, you know, when you have a passion for something, it's because you're remembering a past life somewhere. Okay, you're not going to get obsessed by something that you're not connected to deeply on some levels. So, so let's give credit to him because apparently Times Magazine or Times Books, whatever, didn't know about that. The following excerpt was taken from The Secret of Atlantis. At 8 p.m. on June 5th, 8498 BC, the core parts of asteroid A punched the first decisive hole in the fracture zone of the Atlantic Ridge. The forces of hell were let loose. Through two newly formed vents, the glowing red-hot magma shot up at terrific speed and mixed with the liquid above it. The waters of the Atlantic. This created all the conditions for a submarine volcanic eruption of the greatest violence. The fractured seam was torn apart. The bottom of the sea burst open. All existing volcanoes were activated and new vents formed. Terrestrial fires, ocean, water became embroiled in an ever-increasing volume. Magma mixed with the steam. The chain of fire ran all the way between the two continents from the Beringberg volcano on Jan Mayen in the north to Tristan da Cunha in the south. Beginning with Plato's accounts of Atlantis, Muck comments on the accuracy of the physical description of the Western Atlantic, though its existence completely contradicted the popular belief held about the Earth in Plato's time. With the discovery and conquest of the New World, attention again turned to Atlantis. Francis Bacon specified Brazil as the continent mentioned. Others agreed with him. In 1665, Father Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit, discerned summits of submerged Atlantic ridges in the Azores and drew a map of Atlantis resembling a pear with its stem pointing southwest. Well, let me just tell you something. In the 1980s, I had a friend who was a diver in the Bahamas. He was like a sea captain, and he actually was working with scientists to find Atlantis, and they would actually coordinate, you know, sea captains can coordinate points, right, on a map. They're supposed to, that's what they do. And so they had coordinated and they had found a fallen temple off the coast of Bimini. And they had taken pictures, the coordinates were correct. They went home, they came back the following day, same coordinates. They couldn't find a fucking thing at all, which harks back to the Bermuda Triangle and these portals. The portals are one of the options that we can look at. We can also look at the concept of dimensional conscious frequency match. When you say, I don't want to incarnate here ever again in 3D, you have to understand that you being a good girl or a good boy is not going to get you anywhere. You have to be in a high dimensional conscious match to higher frequencies, so you're not a match to lower dense frequencies like 3D, for example. What that means is that you can have coordinates of an area that you've mapped out in the middle of the ocean or in the middle of, say, a mountain. Like, for example, in Tibet, there are portals that open into what I would call Shambhala, right? And you try to go back because your consciousness has shifted, you're back into 3D, you will not find them to save your life at all. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Any questions on that at all? So it's really interesting, isn't it? Any comments on that? Have you heard that? I know that one of you has heard about these kinds of concepts of portals. And in fact, Freddie Silver just came out with a book on portals, and he's really promoting the shit out of it, and he's a hell of a good author. You may actually want to buy his book on portals. It's a great, I haven't bought it yet. I bought the Audible, but I haven't had time to read it. Any questions on that? Okay. Hang on for a quick second. I want to look at the next thing. Because I'm jumping around. I am jumping, okay, so this is going to be a little different. Asteroid craters. The ocean floor in the Atlantic east of North America's southeast coast shows an abnormality. Two great holes, 23,000 feet deep, Muck regards these deep sea holes as the unhealed scars left by the deep wounds inflicted on the Earth's crust by the impact of a celestial body of considerable size, an asteroid. In the 1930s, an aerial survey first called, did you hear that? In the 1930s, God knows what we can see right now with satellites. God knows what they're seeing, and they're not telling us. In the 1930s, an aerial survey first called attention to the Carolina crater field. The area around Charleston is dotted with bays, holes, and created by the impact of a meteorite that fell about 10,000 years ago. The famous Tugasky meteor that fell in Siberia in 1908 is estimated to have weighed 1 million tons or more. The enormous amounts of meteoric dust that were introduced into the sky produced clouds all over western Siberia and Europe that turned the light of day into a dim reddish twilight. Muck estimated the forces of the meteorite that destroyed Atlantis was about 200 million times greater. That's some power. He calls on several myths that perhaps give poetic description of the cataclysm. One from the Chilam Balam, written in Mayan language and Roman script, states a fiery rain fell, ashes fell, rocks and trees crashed to the ground. Crashed to the ground. He smashed trees and rocks asunder, and the great snake was torn from the sky and skin, and piece of its bones fell onto earth. Arrow struck orphans and old men, widows and widows who were alive, did not have the strength to live, and they were buried on the sandy seashore. Then the waters rose in a terrible flood, and with the great snake the sky fell, the dry land sank into the sea. This description originates in a country not far from where the Carolina meteorite struck. The imagery of the great snake torn from the sky is very vivid. When you look at the Atlantic Ocean from coast to the European coast, right, the Atlantic Ocean, that you'll see, for example, I'm going to just say France, for example. When I think of Atlantis, the actual continent of Atlantis, I see it having been attached to the Americas and attached to the European. And then it literally broke away like a puzzle, forever lost. And that's why there's such, well, we have a lot of Caribbean islands, we have a lot of, little islands all over that area. So pieces were left. So you could say the top of the mountains, and people began to nomadically, reach whatever shores they could find as fast as possible. You can imagine. And some of the greater minds of the Atlantean Council and the people who were the rulers of Atlantis would have, for the most part, perished. They wouldn't have made it. In terms of the people, the factions that were against the dark forces, if you will, that were the cause of it wasn't just a meteorite. I'm going to just say this. These kind of cataclysms that happen are connected to low or high frequency. In other words, if you have a low frequency, if there is a constant negative force, it becomes an egregore. And this egregore has a life force that can create changes in the atmosphere. It can attract the wrong type of cataclysm, to be honest. And you might want to call it karma. You could call it punishment. I just call it frequency. It's just frequency. Let me see here. What about the extra dimensional? What books? Okay. What about the Richard structure? I don't know what you mean by that. If you don't mind typing more so I understand. I thought that was supposed to be Atlantis. No, it is Atlantis. And so, as far as I'm concerned, having studied Atlantis for a long time, I feel as if there was a frequency mismatch. There was a collision between the druids and the priests and the high council that were very much into their greed, and the ones of light, the ones that wanted to keep a balance. And there was, you might say, a civil war between the two factions, and that collision created what they call le déluge, the great tsunamis. And I've done hypnotherapy with clients all over the world, and I would say that 5 of them in the last, say, 18 months remembered Atlantis, and it was they thought they had enough time to save the situation. And when they started feeling the shaking, the snarling, the groaning of their land, of this continent, they realized that it might have been too late, but they were still looking to, you know, create the Richard structure. Hang on, I'm gonna stop. The Richard structure was supposed to be Atlantis. I thought. I have no idea who the Richard structure is. None idea. But I think too many people are taking credit for. Like, for example, people are saying Atlantis is over here, Atlantis is over there. To be honest with you, Atlantis, it's that whole continent. That's why when I lived in the Bahamas, and I had this particular friend who, believe me, this was like in the when was this? 1980, yeah, 1980, thereabouts. Yeah, this guy was totally upfront about what he was doing, and the scientists that were working on finding these structures. There was a book on that too, where they had pictures of the columns and what they were finding, and then suddenly they would go back and it'd be gone. It made no sense at all, no sense whatsoever. So Atlantis technically has never been found. No structures have been found. The only structure that was found, okay, is Troy. And Troy, for a while, was thought to be a myth. No different. Homer's Troy was thought to be like Plato's Atlantis. Okay? If that makes sense. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Hang on for a quick second. I'm going to just see for some. Let me see if I can get the guy. I think he was a German. The guy who found Troy, which shook shit up because for a while, like I said, they thought it was a whatchamacallit, they thought it was a myth, right? Just bullshit, like a fairy tale. And when he found it, they were shocked because he was a multimillionaire. He had absolutely no training in archaeology. He just decided, fuck it, let me go look. And he went ahead kind of somewhat illegally with his team. And sure enough, there it was. And they carbon dated the jewelry, all of the things that they found. And sure enough, it was Troy. So, okay, so that's what I'm going to say. But so far, no. Trust me. Will it rise? There are aspects of it that will rise, I'm sure. But I feel as if that would not be a good positive for a lot of us, to be honest. Can they see it from the satellite? I think they can, and I think they have. And I think it appears and disappears and appears and disappears. There's no way. It's no different than Google Maps, where you see 568 Main Street and there's Aunt Melba sitting there on her easy chair or whatever, her hammock, and then 5 years later Google comes back and does another photo. Someone else bought the house and it's someone else. But the difference is that unlike the changes in Google Map, right, or for example, to map a house, in my opinion, this is my humble opinion, is that they're seeing these structures underneath the water. There's no, because they can map. You can buy maps of the ocean, right? The ocean floor. All right. So they can see structures. I know they can. And then it comes and it goes based on portals opening and closing. There was, and I don't know why this has stopped, but there was a time in the 1960s, in the 1970s and 80s, up until then, where everyone was agog and going crazy over the Bermuda Triangle. It was called the Devil's Triangle because planes were disappearing. I mean, we're talking about, I think, one whole jet plane, at least one, if not more than one, but definitely one whole jet plane just fucking disappeared and they never found the wreckage. And if it had hit the ocean, right, with satellites imaging, right, by now we would have found the plane. But they've never found anything. And there would be jets basically going and disappearing. Where do portals lead to? It depends. It's an interesting question. I honestly think that some portals lead to places that you want to be in. Like, for example, there are portals, and as you go up into the Himalayas, I've heard stories of monks going up and climbing, and suddenly their consciousness is in the right frequency to open a portal that suddenly in the middle of a snow-capped mountain where there's a fucking blizzard, suddenly they're walking in and it's completely a jungle. It feels like it's warm, it's balmy, there's waterfalls, there's fruit trees and lang ylang, or that kind of thing, jasmine. And the portals, those particular portals are what I would say, they're they show us what reality really is, and that the planet and that the universe, and this is why we can manifest and co-create, is a holographic universe. This is why, and we're going to talk about reality a little bit in the way I'm going to express it. Like, this is why, for example, some of us will go to, for example, and I'm sharing things I've actually experienced. Okay, I'm not going to tell you shit I've read in this particular case. But I remember walking the streets of Paris, certain streets, only certain streets, walking through Versailles. Okay, when there was no one there, it was no tourist trap bullshit, and I could feel, I could see. Like holographic images. I'm going to call it like that. That's not how I saw it then, but that's how I can express it to you now, of people who had lived in the 17th century, 18th century. And I could feel them. Now, for a long time, I kept that to myself because it didn't feel like something you can share. And as I started talking to people more and more about this, I realized I wasn't the only one. People had actually gone through the exact same experiences. And so there's holographic, reverberating images of what was once there. It's almost like you could call it a walking photocopy from 500 years ago that still has an energy frequency. They're not ghosts. They're not trapped. They're not poltergeists. They're not here to. They're not even technically there. They're almost like a facsimile of what was happening, or their presence, kind of like a thumbprint. The person is dead, but the thumbprint is still there. Does that make sense? But it's on an energy moving holographic type of situation. So that's one aspect. In terms of portals, we know, right, with the pyramids and with other structures created with consciousness, with the awareness of the celestial skies and so forth, and things that go all the way back to the Anunnakis and beyond. We know that these centers, if you will, like Stonehenge, like like Easter Island, for example, or other structures or places in nature that do not need anything else but just these portals open up to different worlds. So I'll give you an example. So like right now, you're sitting in your living room, or in your bedroom, or wherever the hell you are, in your car. And right now there are two men sitting on horseback watching the sun rise. They're in 5-6D. And so in a way, they're right there, right on your ass. But they are living in a higher consciousness that is not a match to see us, and we cannot see them. Does that make sense? They won't see us. And it's interesting because that was one of the things that the Celestine prophecy by James Writing, I believe his name is, wrote about in the 1980s. It was an incredible parable. It was a parable which showed that idea of how you could reach such a high consciousness that you could leave, that you could literally no longer be a match to dense energies, and you literally just in a way disappeared through 3D and went into 5 or 6D, or however. Do you understand? When I do, like, for example, hypnotherapy, when I've done Akashic readings, one of the things I first noticed was, especially in hypnotherapy, because that's really fascinating to me, because again, you're getting energy from someone who does not know what you know, meaning me, in terms of how portals work. So I've had people going into hypnotherapy going, yes, I'm in 7D, I'm a blue type of avian or whatever, and I've decided to lower my frequency, and or they won't even say that. They'll say, yeah, I've decided to experience planet Earth, and I see this portal opening, I'm stepping through it, and I'm just going, it's almost like going down a grade or two into the frequency, say for example, to incarnate or to be one of the founders of Atlantis. Right? So you would have gone through a portal. I've seen that in my own Akashic readings when I do Akashic readings for clients, but I've seen, that's what blows my mind. When I see people in hypnotherapy that have no fucking idea that the process for many of us who incarnated to lower frequencies, purposely, by the way, we did it through stepping through portals from high dimensional consciousness, 7D, 6D, whatever, right on that level. And literally a portal opens and we literally travel into planet Earth. And planet Earth at that point, when we first started doing these incarnations, was in 560 consciousness. So when we talk about 560 again, when we talk about going in and ascending into the high frequency, people think it's going to be a mechanical thing where you're punching your ticket through and you're getting on a train, they're punching your ticket and you're like fully aware it's happening. It's good for some of you, you will actually have the incredible good grace of actually experiencing that. Some of us will not have the, you know how they talk about the dead DNA? The junk DNA, excuse me, junk DNA, which is kind of in my book dead, but junk DNA. Some people are so cynical. They're good people though, but they're so cynical, or they're so entrenched in 3D. They love the Matrix, right? Or they can't conceive of anything else but the Matrix. Those people will drop their bodies because they cannot go through that portal. It's not a match. They can't. They're so, it's not, they just can't wrap their head around. This is why some of us have had to take, this is not for all of you, but some of us have had to take ayahuasca to blow our brains. In other words, our 3D brain had to just be completely hacked. We had to reset ourselves to zero, back to our original consciousness, if you will. Do you understand? An understanding of the impossible being possible, that kind of understanding, and surrender to. And I feel as if what's happening is that this is why a lot of psychics are saying you're going to see a lot of people drop their bodies. They're straight up saying it. And it's because they can't do the transition. They don't have the bandwidth. Or some of them are starseeds, or many of them are starseeds, but some of them are starseeds who are so fucking homesick. They have been so hurt by the 3D world. They are so bereft that mercy comes upon them, and they are allowed to drop their bodies to and they'll meet you on the other side. And you physical forms that are more of a match to 560, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. So, but some of you, that's what's cool in my opinion, some of you will actually go through the transition and be fully aware of it, and some of you will be completely, you'll wake up and you'll think the world changed a little bit, but you won't go too much into like blowing your own mind, if that makes sense. Where do portals lead? Okay, so I hope that I answered that question. Any other questions? Any other questions on that? Thank you, Monkey. You're asking really great questions. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not sure. Hopefully it made sense. Oh, this was a book. Okay, this is the one here's the one. This is the one I really, really love. This is the one that really talks a lot of truths that this book... This is more of some of the geological, anthropological, science, which, okay, great. But this is the one that really talks about the psychic aspects to it, okay? So any other questions or comments? All right, so I'm doing the Esoteric Book Club. If you want to join it, let me know. You can actually go on my Linktree. It's on my profile on the community page here. You can check it out there. If not, if you can't find me, for some reason you can't find my Linktree for some reason, which can happen. I'm also on TikTok with the same handle, Sacred Intimacy Tarot. You can also leave me a comment on any of my videos and say, look, I can't find your Linktree, and I'll go ahead and respond. And this Esoteric Book Club is going to start with this book, actually, this one right here. Okay, and the next book might be I don't know. We'll see. I'm looking at 3 of the great books: Journey, Destiny of Souls. It could be Dr. Joe Dispenza book. It could be. We'll see. I'm going through, but we will vote on the books. We will definitely vote on the books. So far, we have 11 people on the Esoteric Book Club, and it's exciting. There's a lot of beautiful minds and high priestesses. It's mostly, unfortunately, I mean, it's not bad, but it's mostly women. It's actually all women in this book club. Men are absolutely, completely invited if you want, because you've been women before. And you're welcome to join if you want to. Okay. All right. I want to send you so much love and thank you for being here. I appreciate your time. All right. Namaste. Be well. Take care.